In the distant corners of the galaxy, far away from the busy center of power, there lived an alien race known as the Vantari. Once a proud and thriving civilization, the Vantari were now facing the collapse of everything they had built. Their planets, once green and full of life, were turning barren. The sky, once blue, now had a faint gray hue. Their oceans had dried up, leaving only cracks in the land. The people of the Vantari struggled to survive, relying on the remaining resources to keep their cities alive, but it was becoming impossible. Once, the Vantari had been part of a powerful alliance with other galactic civilizations. They had shared technology, knowledge, and trade, but now those same allies had turned their backs. The galaxy had grown too busy, too consumed with their own problems, and the Vantari's cries for help were falling on deaf ears. Many of their old allies had simply forgotten them. As their situation grew more desperate, Princess Lyra, the youngest leader of the Vantari people, knew something had to be done. She had always been a hopeful person, believing that there was still a chance for her people to survive. She believed that there was someone somewhere who might listen and help. The Vantari had once been allies with many powerful species, so surely there must still be someone out there who could help them. One day, Princess Lyra decided to take a bold step. She gathered her closest advisors and ordered the transmission of a distress signal, a message that would travel across the stars, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear it. The message was simple but full of desperation. "We, the Vantari, ask for help. Our people are dying. Our worlds are dying. We have nowhere left to turn. Please, send aid." The message was sent on all frequencies, hoping to catch the attention of any ship or station that might be able to help. The signal would have to travel through vast distances, crossing through dangerous regions of space where few ships dared to venture. But Princess Lyra had no choice. It was their last hope. If no one answered, her people would be lost forever. As the days turned into weeks, the Vantari waited anxiously, hoping against hope that someone would respond. There were no replies at first. The silence was deafening, and the people began to lose hope. They had sent the message, but it felt as though the galaxy had turned its back on them. Princess Lyra, despite her worries, refused to give up. She walked among her people, offering words of comfort and encouragement. She reminded them that they were survivors, that they had made it through hard times before. But deep down, she feared that they would not survive this one. Then, one day, a signal came through. It was faint at first, but it was unmistakable. A human ship had picked up the distress call. The humans were not the most powerful species in the galaxy, but they had earned a reputation for their ingenuity and bravery. They were known to be bold, always willing to face challenges others would shy away from. When Princess Lyra received the message, she felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. The human ship, the Valor, was on a long-range patrol near the Vantari system. Captain Rachel Carter, a respected leader in the human fleet, had been the one to order the ship to investigate the mysterious distress signal. She was known for her keen instincts and her strong sense of justice. When she heard the Vantari's message, she felt a deep sense of responsibility. She knew that she couldn't turn her back on a people in need, no matter how far from home they were. Captain Carter quickly made arrangements to send a team to the Vantari system. They would offer whatever help they could. She knew the situation would be difficult, but she was determined to do what was right. The humans had been through their own struggles in the past, and their own history had shown that they never backed down from a challenge. They didn't turn their backs on others. As the Valor set course for the Vantari system, Princess Lyra received word of the humans' approach. She could hardly believe it at first. After weeks of silence, a glimmer of hope had appeared. She gathered her council and began preparing to meet the human representatives. She knew that this might be their last chance, and she would do everything in her power to make sure the Vantari survived. For the first time in a long while, Princess Lyra felt a sense of hope. The galaxy may have turned away from her people, but it seemed that humanity, with its deep sense of compassion and unyielding determination, was ready to step in and offer help. The future of the Vantari people, though uncertain, was no longer sealed in darkness. There was a chance, and that was all they needed. Captain Rachel Carter stood on the bridge of the Valor, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The ship was making its way toward the Vantari system at full speed. Her crew was busy with preparations, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into the unknown. The distress signal from the Vantari had been unlike any other she had received before. It was filled with desperation, and she had no idea what to expect when they arrived. She had read about the Vantari, a once great species, known for their advanced technology and wisdom, but she had never met one. The ship's comms officer, Lieutenant Briggs, called out from his station. "Captain, we are approaching the Vantari system. I've tried reaching their communication network again, but there's still no direct response. It's like their signal is fading." Rachel nodded. "Keep trying, Lieutenant. We're not turning back. They need us." The rest of the bridge crew worked quietly, focusing on their tasks, but Rachel could tell that everyone was on edge. This mission was unlike any other. The galaxy had grown so large, and the space between different species had become so wide that it was rare to hear from anyone in need of help. The Vantari, it seemed, had been forgotten. Yet, here they were, a species in crisis, hoping that humans might be their last hope. As the Valor neared the Vantari homeworld, Rachel thought about her own people. Humans had their own struggles, their own history of conflict, but they were survivors. Time and again, they had risen to the occasion, even when it seemed like the odds were against them. Rachel had learned that you could never count humanity out, no matter how dire the situation. And she was determined to show the Vantari that same resilience. "We are entering the Vantari system now, Captain," Lieutenant Briggs reported. "I'm picking up several signals, mostly faint. It seems like their communication network is in disarray, but there are still active stations." Rachel stood up from her chair. "All right, prepare for landing. We'll need to meet with the Vantari leadership right away. I'll lead the team myself." Minutes later, the Valor landed on one of the Vantari's few remaining operational stations. The air was thin, and the station seemed worn down from years of neglect. Still, it was functional, and that was enough for now. As Rachel and her team disembarked from the ship, they were greeted by a small group of Vantari officials. They looked exhausted, but there was a spark of hope in their eyes when they saw the human team. Princess Lyra was among the group waiting to meet them. She was taller than Rachel had expected, with sharp features that reflected both strength and wisdom. Her purple skin shimmered faintly in the dim light of the station, and her eyes glowed with a soft intensity. She stepped forward, her expression a mix of gratitude and caution. "I am Princess Lyra of the Vantari," she said, her voice steady, but tinged with weariness. "We never thought anyone would come. You've restored hope where there was none." Rachel extended her hand, offering a small but genuine smile. "We're here to help, Princess. We'll do everything we can to save your people." Lyra hesitated for a moment before shaking Rachel's hand, her grip firm but measured. "I hope your words are true. Our people have suffered much, and trust is hard to come by these days, but I will listen to what you have to offer." Rachel nodded, understanding the Vantari's caution. Trust was not given freely, especially when your civilization had been abandoned by those who once promised to stand by you. But the humans had no intention of abandoning them, not after everything they had been through together. Lyra led the humans through the station, explaining the situation. The once thriving cities of the Vantari were now little more than ruins. Their food supplies were running low, and their planet's resources were almost entirely depleted. The Vantari had relied on trade with other civilizations, but the isolation they now faced had left them vulnerable. Their technologies, once cutting edge, were now difficult to maintain, and they no longer had the resources to repair their ships or stations. Rachel listened carefully, taking note of every detail. This wasn't just about offering resources. It was about rebuilding trust, about showing the Vantari that they were not forgotten. She knew that the humans had their own problems, but they had always found a way to face challenges head-on. She was determined to show the Vantari that the humans would stand by them, just as they had stood by their own people through countless wars and conflicts. "We can't solve everything at once," Rachel said as they reached a meeting room. "But we can start by offering you food supplies, medical assistance, and repairing your communication systems. We'll also help protect your remaining cities and start training your people on how to rebuild." Lyra nodded, a faint smile appearing on her face. "It is a small beginning, but it is a beginning. I will ask the council to work with you. For now, this is the best we can do." As the meeting continued, the human team began to lay out a plan for how they would assist the Vantari. They would work together to save what was left of the Vantari civilization. Rachel could see that the princess had begun to trust them, but there was still much to be done. They had no idea how long this would take or what challenges lay ahead, but for the first time, Rachel felt that the humans had made a real difference in the lives of the Vantari. They weren't just strangers offering help. They were allies, and this was only the beginning of their shared journey. Days turned into weeks, and the Valor remained in the Vantari system, working tirelessly to assist the alien race. Captain Rachel Carter and her crew were busy helping to stabilize the Vantari's remaining infrastructure. The humans had brought food supplies, medical equipment, and much-needed technology to help with repairs. Their engineers worked side by side with Vantari scientists to restore power to their cities, fix damaged communication satellites, and clear up the radiation that had been poisoning their environment. Princess Lyra was always present during these efforts, making sure that her people worked alongside the humans. It wasn't easy for her to place so much trust in strangers, especially after her people had been abandoned by so many other allies. But Rachel and her crew had proven themselves time and time again. Lyra had witnessed the tireless dedication of the humans, their refusal to give up no matter how difficult the task. Slowly, but surely, the Vantari began to see the humans not as outsiders, but as friends. One evening, after a long day of work, Rachel and Princess Lyra sat together in a small room overlooking the Vantari homeworld. The two women had grown close over the past few weeks, sharing stories of their respective cultures and histories. Lyra had told Rachel of the glory days of the Vantari civilization, when their people had been known throughout the galaxy for their intelligence and compassion. She spoke of their ancient traditions, their art, and the bond they had once shared with other species. But those days seemed so far away now. Lyra's voice had softened as she spoke of the loss of her people's former greatness. "I often wonder if we'll ever be able to rebuild," she admitted, her gaze distant. "Our cities have fallen into ruin, our people are struggling, and we are a shadow of what we once were." Rachel's eyes softened with understanding. She knew what it was like to face loss. The human race had gone through its own dark times, times when it seemed like there was no hope. But Rachel knew that as long as you kept fighting, kept moving forward, there was always a chance to rebuild. "You're not alone anymore," Rachel said firmly. "The humans are here, and we will help you rebuild. It won't happen overnight, but we've made it through the darkest times. You can, too." Lyra nodded, but there was a glimmer of doubt in her eyes. "But can we ever be what we once were?" Rachel looked out over the planet. The sky was slowly brightening as the sun began to set. She thought about her own history, the hardships her people had faced, the wars, the loss, the rebuilding. Humans were resilient, and that was something she believed could be shared with others. The key to the future, she thought, wasn't in returning to the past, but in creating something new, something better. "I think you can," Rachel said. "Not in the same way you were before, but in your own way. Every people have their own path. We just have to walk it together." The two women sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their thoughts, but the weight of the conversation felt lighter now. There was a bond forming between them, a bond that extended beyond the exchange of resources and knowledge. It was a partnership, a new alliance forged in the fires of desperation and hope. The next day, as the humans continued to repair the Vantari stations and infrastructure, Lyra invited Rachel to visit one of their remaining cities. The city, though battered, still held the echoes of the Vantari's former grandeur. Tall buildings, though damaged, stretched high into the sky, and lush greenery could be seen in small patches around the city. Despite the damage, there was a strange beauty in the way the people had adapted to their circumstances. The streets were lined with makeshift shelters, but there was a sense of unity in the air. Rachel and her team toured the city, meeting with Vantari families and offering help where they could. As they walked through the streets, Rachel could see the change in the people's faces. The hopelessness that had once lingered was now being replaced by a glimmer of hope. They weren't completely out of danger, but they were moving forward. And that was enough. Later that evening, as Rachel and Lyra sat on a balcony overlooking the city, the princess spoke up again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about building something new." Rachel smiled. "You have to look at the future, not the past. The past is important, but it's the future that will determine who you are." Lyra looked out over the city, her eyes filled with a new determination. "Maybe we don't need to be what we were. Maybe we need to be something better." Rachel nodded. "Exactly. And that's what will help you build something better." The two women had spent so much time talking about what the Vantari had lost that they hadn't realized how far they had already come. The Vantari weren't just surviving, they were beginning to thrive again. And with the help of the humans, they would rebuild a future that was strong and filled with promise. As the night fell, the stars above seemed to shine brighter than before. For the first time in a long while, there was a sense of hope in the air. The Vantari had not been abandoned. They had found allies in the humans, and together, they would build a new future. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but Rachel and Lyra both knew that they would walk it side by side. The days seemed to blur together as the efforts to rebuild the Vantari homeworld continued. Rachel Carter and her crew had been working around the clock, and the signs of progress were starting to show. The city that had once seemed so distant from any kind of hope was now alive with activity. The sounds of workers fixing damaged structures, engineers repairing vital machinery, and scientists collaborating on new technologies filled the air. People were beginning to believe again. Captain Rachel stood on the balcony of the Vantari Council Hall, looking down at the city below. The sun had just risen, casting a soft orange glow over the skyline. It was still a long way from being restored, but for the first time since arriving, Rachel felt that the Vantari might truly have a chance to recover. She thought about the journey they had made together, how their two peoples had gone from complete strangers to allies working side by side for a common goal. Princess Lyra joined her on the balcony, her long purple robes flowing in the morning breeze. There was a quiet strength about her, a kind of calm determination that Rachel had come to admire. Lyra had come a long way from the woman who had once doubted the humans' ability to help. Now she was not just a leader of her people, but a symbol of hope for all who had thought the Vantari's time had passed. "Good morning, Captain," Lyra said, her voice calm but with a note of appreciation. "The city looks different today, doesn't it?" Rachel nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "It does. It's hard to believe how far we've come in such a short time." Lyra turned her gaze toward the horizon. "It's hard to believe. Our people were ready to give up. I was ready to give up." Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder. "But you didn't. You chose to fight for your people. And we're here because of that." The princess gave her a small, grateful smile. "I had my doubts at first, but you showed me that hope is something worth holding on to. You showed me that even in the darkest times, there's always a way forward." Just then, a message came through the comm system. It was Lieutenant Briggs, calling from the Valor. "Captain Carter," he said, his voice steady, "we've received an update from the Federation. They've heard about our efforts here, and they're sending reinforcements. More ships, more supplies, and additional personnel. They want to help with the rebuilding efforts." Rachel's heart lifted at the news. The Federation's involvement meant that the Vantari wouldn't be left to fend for themselves anymore. It was a symbol of support, a message that the galaxy was still willing to help those in need. "That's great news, Lieutenant," Rachel replied. "Let them know we'll coordinate with them as soon as they arrive." Turning back to Lyra, she saw the surprise in the princess's eyes. "The Federation?" Lyra asked. "They're coming to help us." Rachel nodded. "The humans are proving that alliances matter. You're not alone in this fight anymore, Princess. Together, we're stronger." Lyra took a deep breath. "I never imagined we would be able to restore what we lost. But now, I see a future where we stand beside you as equals." Rachel smiled. "That's the idea. We're in this together." As the days passed, the Vantari's recovery picked up speed. The Federation reinforcements arrived, bringing with them new technologies and resources that made the rebuilding process even more efficient. The Vantari cities, though still scared, were starting to resemble their former glory. Power plants hummed to life, and the once dead skies now carried the sounds of activity. The people had hope again, and with that hope, they began to rebuild their lives. The humans and Vantari worked together seamlessly, sharing knowledge and skills to repair what was broken. The scientists from both races collaborated on improving energy systems, while engineers from the Valor assisted in constructing new transportation networks. Medical teams worked tirelessly to treat those who had been affected by the planet's deteriorating conditions, and they quickly saw improvements in the overall health of the Vantari people. But despite the progress, there were still challenges. The Vantari had once been at the forefront of technology, but many of their innovations had been lost in the years of isolation. Now they had to learn to adapt to new ways of doing things, relying on the humans' knowledge as much as their own. But the Vantari were a resilient people, and they took to the new technologies quickly. Rachel spent more time with Princess Lyra during these weeks, offering guidance where needed and learning from her in return. The two women had formed a strong friendship, one based on mutual respect and a shared vision for the future. They spent hours discussing strategies, making sure that their people's needs were met, and learning how to manage the complexities of their new alliance. One evening, as they sat together reviewing plans for the next phase of rebuilding, Lyra turned to Rachel with a thoughtful expression. "You've given us more than just resources and technology. You've given us something we've lost: the will to fight, the will to move forward." Rachel smiled warmly. "You're the one who showed your people that it's possible to move forward, Princess. Without you, none of this would have happened." Lyra nodded, a spark of confidence in her eyes. "Then, together, we'll make sure that the Vantari never forget how to fight again." Rachel looked out at the horizon, where the setting sun bathed the city in golden light. The road ahead was still long, but the future was brighter than it had ever been. They had overcome the first hurdle, and now, with their alliance stronger than ever, there was no limit to what they could achieve. Together, humans and Vantari had forged something unbreakable, a new future, and nothing would stand in their way. Months had passed since the humans and Vantari had formed their alliance. The rebuilding efforts were now in full swing. Rachel Carter and Princess Lyra could see their worlds transforming. The Vantari cities were slowly returning to life, and their people were beginning to thrive again. But despite the progress, there was still one challenge that remained: trust. The Vantari, though grateful for the help they had received, were still cautious. For generations, they had been abandoned and forgotten by their allies. They had learned to survive alone, and trusting others had become difficult. Some Vantari leaders still questioned the humans' motives, unsure if they could truly be trusted. One evening, Rachel and Lyra sat in the council room of the newly restored Vantari government building. Lyra had asked Rachel to join her for a meeting with the Vantari Council. The council members were important figures in the Vantari government, and their support was crucial for the alliance's success. Lyra, sitting at the head of the table, looked at her council members with a sense of determination. "We've made incredible progress," she began, "but I know some of you still have doubts. You wonder if the humans will remain loyal to us, if this alliance will stand the test of time. But I've seen the dedication of Captain Carter and her crew. I've seen how they've worked tirelessly to help us rebuild. They've given us hope. and it's time we trust them." The room was silent for a moment, the council members exchanging glances. Rachel sat beside Lyra, her posture confident but understanding. She knew the Vantari's hesitation was not out of malice, but out of fear of being abandoned once again. One of the council members, a tall Vantari named Theric, finally spoke up. "Your Highness, we appreciate the help the humans have given us, but we must remember that they are not like us. Their ways are different, their values are not the same. How can we be certain that they will stay when they finish with us? How do we know they won't leave us just like the others did?" Rachel looked directly at Theric, her voice calm but firm. "I understand your concerns, Theric. I do. But let me tell you something about the humans. We've been through our own wars, our own struggles. We've fought for our survival time and time again, and we never leave a fight unfinished. We fought for freedom, for justice, for each other. When we make a promise, we keep it. I promise you, we won't abandon you." Lyra nodded, her voice strong. "The humans have shown us that they will stand by us. They are here for the long haul. Together, we can create a future stronger than any we've had before." Theric's eyes narrowed, but after a long moment, he nodded slowly. "I will trust your judgment, Your Highness. But remember, words are easy. Actions speak louder." Rachel gave him a steady look. "Then let our actions speak." The council session continued, and the discussions grew more focused. But Rachel could sense that the doubt that had lingered in the air was beginning to lift. The Vantari were beginning to understand that this wasn't just a temporary partnership, it was something deeper. The humans weren't here to take advantage of them or use them for their own gain. They were here because they believed in the potential of the Vantari and wanted to help them succeed. As the meeting drew to a close, Lyra stood and addressed the council once more. "We have a long road ahead of us, but today we take the first step toward a future of unity. Let's move forward together, not as separate races, but as allies." The council members stood in unison, offering their approval. The mood in the room had shifted. It wasn't just trust in words anymore. It was trust in actions, in the willingness to work together toward a common goal. Later that evening, as Rachel walked back to the Valor, she reflected on the day's events. The Vantari had been skeptical, but they had taken the first step toward true unity. It hadn't been easy, but Rachel knew that this was a crucial turning point in the relationship between their people. Lyra joined her on the ship's deck, and the two women looked out over the now thriving Vantari city. The stars above seemed brighter that night, as if they too were witnessing a new chapter in the galaxy's story. "You did well today," Rachel said to Lyra. "You stood strong, and you gave them the confidence they needed." Lyra smiled, a sense of pride in her eyes. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us. And it's because of you and your crew. You've shown us what it means to be true allies." Rachel chuckled. "It's not about being perfect. It's about standing together when it counts." They stood in silence for a moment, both looking out at the horizon. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. The humans and Vantari had proven that unity could overcome even the deepest fears. Together, they were stronger than they had ever been apart, and nothing could tear them apart now. The unity between the humans and the Vantari had grown stronger every day. Rachel Carter and Princess Lyra's shared vision was turning into reality. Vantari cities were flourishing again, and the people had regained their sense of hope. The humans had not only helped them rebuild, but had also become true partners in every sense of the word. It was a partnership born out of shared struggle and mutual respect. But even as the future began to look bright, a new threat emerged that would test their alliance. One evening, as Rachel sat in the command center of the Valor, a distress signal blared through the communication system. It was urgent. An attack. A nearby system, not far from the Vantari homeworld, was under assault. The enemy ships, dark and menacing, bore no recognizable markings. The Federation had intercepted their movements, and it was clear they were no ordinary raiders. This was something bigger, something more dangerous. "Captain Carter, we've received intel," said Lieutenant Briggs over the comms. "There's an unknown fleet advancing toward the Vantari colonies. We believe they're targeting the most vulnerable outposts. We need to respond immediately." Rachel's heart sank. The Vantari had only just begun to recover. They couldn't afford to be thrown into another battle. Not yet. But she knew that they had no choice. This was what they had been preparing for. This was the test of their unity. The moment where their alliance would be put to the ultimate trial. Rachel immediately contacted Princess Lyra, who had been reviewing some reconstruction plans when the news came through. Lyra's calm voice echoed over the comms as she received the report. "This is not a time for hesitation," Lyra said, her tone resolute. "We've seen the strength of the humans. We've felt their commitment to our cause. We will stand together now. I will mobilize our forces immediately." The Vantari military, though recovering, was still formidable. It was equipped with advanced weaponry, but the fleet was not as large or as powerful as it had once been. The Valor and the human ships, along with the Vantari forces, would have to work together to fight off the attackers. Rachel knew this would be no small task, but she also knew that together, they stood a chance. The next few hours were a blur of preparations. Both human and Vantari crews rushed to their stations, readying their ships for battle. The atmosphere aboard the Valor was tense, but there was a sense of determination in the air. They had fought together before in smaller skirmishes, but this would be the first real test of their combined strength. As they approached the location of the attack, the enormity of the situation became clear. The enemy fleet was massive, far larger than anything they had expected. The ships were sleek, dark, and designed for speed and precision. They moved with military efficiency, and their weapon systems glowed with a cold, deadly energy. Rachel stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the screen that showed the incoming enemy ships. She could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for everything they had worked for, the future of the Vantari, and the promise of a new united galaxy. "Captain Carter," Lieutenant Briggs called, his voice urgent. "We're almost in range. The enemy is preparing to engage. What's our strategy?" Rachel glanced over at Princess Lyra, who had joined her on the bridge. The princess looked calm, but Rachel could see the same fire in her eyes that she had seen all those months ago when they first began to rebuild the Vantari homeworld. "We fight together," Rachel said firmly. "No one stands alone. We coordinate our attacks with the Vantari forces. We'll use their long-range weapons to create a defensive barrier, and we'll move in close to engage their fleet. The key is to break their formation. If we can do that, we'll have the advantage." Lyra nodded. "I will have our fleet move into position immediately. We will not let them take our home." The two fleets, one human, one Vantari, moved into formation. The Valor led the charge, with smaller Vantari ships flanking the sides. Rachel felt the hum of the ship beneath her feet as they accelerated toward the enemy fleet. The countdown to battle had begun. The first exchange of fire was sudden and intense. Bright flashes of light filled the space as energy blasts collided with shields. The enemy ships were fast, but the combined tactics of the humans and Vantari were even faster. The Vantari ships unleashed a barrage of long-range missiles, striking the enemy's outermost ships and causing massive explosions. But the enemy retaliated with precision. Their weapons struck the Vantari ships, creating devastating impacts. For a moment, Rachel's heart stopped as one of the Vantari ships was hit hard. But it didn't break. The Vantari crew fought back, their ships swarming in tight formation to shield their allies. "Stay with me," Rachel called over the comms to her crew. "We have to protect the Vantari. They're counting on us." The battle raged on, a deadly dance of ships weaving through the debris of destroyed vessels. The Valor took heavy damage, but its shields held strong. Rachel gritted her teeth as she barked orders, guiding the ship through the chaos. It was clear. The enemy would not stop unless they were forced to. But Rachel could feel it. There was something more than just a fight for survival here. It was a test of everything they had built. It was a fight for the future. "Hold the line," she shouted, her voice resolute. The humans and Vantari had come together for this moment, and they would not falter. Together, they would defend their home. Together, they would win. As the battle continued, the enemy began to retreat. The combined strength of the human and Vantari fleets had proven too much for them. With their forces broken, the enemy ships turned and fled, leaving the battlefield silent except for the hum of engines and the distant sound of the retreating enemy. The victory was theirs, but it was more than just a military victory. It was a victory for unity, for trust, for the future. The humans and Vantari had proven that together they could overcome anything. Rachel stood on the bridge, watching the stars ahead. She knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was full of dangers, and they would face them together. But now, they were ready. In the aftermath of the battle, the once chaotic space began to settle. The enemy had retreated, but the cost of the conflict was still visible. Ships were damaged, and the fields of stars around the battle zone were filled with debris. Yet, amid the destruction, there was a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that, no matter the odds, the humans and Vantari had fought together and come out victorious. Rachel Carter stood at the command center aboard the Valor, watching the stars drift by. The battle had been hard-fought, but their unity had won the day. The humans and Vantari had proven that cooperation was their greatest strength. Now, it was time to rebuild, not just the ships and cities, but the very foundations of their alliance. Princess Lyra entered the room, her expression calm but her eyes burning with the same fire that had guided her since the beginning. She walked up beside Rachel and looked out at the endless stretch of space. "We did it," Lyra said, her voice soft but filled with pride. "Our people will never forget what the humans have done for us." Rachel smiled. It wasn't just the humans who had shown courage. The Vantari had stood firm, just as they had promised. "We did it together," she replied. A sense of peace settled over them as they looked out at the stars. The battle had been won, but there was still much work to be done. The Vantari were beginning to rebuild, and the humans had committed to staying and assisting in the restoration of the colonies. There would be no abandoning the Vantari now. They had forged a bond that could not be broken by distance or time. A few days later, Rachel and Princess Lyra met with the leaders of both the human and Vantari forces to discuss the next steps. They gathered in the newly repaired council hall aboard the Valor, which had been transformed from a warship into a symbol of hope. The council meeting was filled with voices from both sides. The human and Vantari leaders spoke of their plans for cooperation, but also of the challenges they would face in the future. There were still threats out there, both known and unknown. But one thing was clear. The galaxy was changing, and the humans and Vantari were at the forefront of this new era. "We can no longer turn a blind eye to the struggles of the weaker races," said General Matthews, one of the human commanders. "It's time to use our strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The galaxy is vast, and there are many who need our help." Lyra nodded in agreement. "Our people have suffered long enough. It is time for us to be a beacon of hope, to offer sanctuary and protection to those who need it. The humans have shown us that strength does not always come from power, it comes from the heart." The room fell silent as the leaders considered the weight of their words. There was an unspoken agreement between the humans and Vantari. They had been through too much together to ever return to the way things were. They would fight for justice, for peace, and for the future. Rachel stood up, her voice steady and clear as she spoke to the gathered leaders. "This is just the beginning. The battles we fought weren't just for survival. They were for something much larger. We have a responsibility now, not just to ourselves, but to the galaxy. We must show them that the strength of our unity is greater than the power of any single force." Her words resonated with everyone in the room. They all knew the weight of the responsibility they had just agreed to take on. The alliance between humans and Vantari would stand as an example to the galaxy of what could be achieved when different species came together for a common purpose. As the meeting concluded, the leaders began to disperse, but there was a new sense of camaraderie in the air. There was no more fear of betrayal or division. The humans and Vantari were united now, not just by necessity, but by choice. They had seen the best in each other, and it had brought them to this moment. Rachel and Lyra remained behind in the council hall, standing together as they looked out at the vastness of space. There was no doubt in their minds that the galaxy would soon be a different place. Together, they would forge a new path forward, one where every species could thrive in peace, and where no one would be abandoned to face their struggles alone. "It's a new beginning," Rachel said, her voice filled with hope. Lyra smiled, her eyes bright with determination. "Yes, and it's only just the beginning. There's much more to come." As they left the council hall, the stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter. The humans and Vantari had proven that even the darkest times could be overcome when they stood together. And now, the galaxy would see that a new era had dawned, one built on unity, courage, and the promise of a future where no one would ever again have to face their battles alone. The journey ahead would be long and challenging, but as long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The galaxy was vast, but with allies like these, they would face it head-on, ready to protect those in need and defend the future they had created.